Good afternoon. My name is Jesse Hassinger. I wrote a lot of stuff, but Dan and Javier basically said everything that I wrote. I'm gonna speak for a little bit. I want to thank Father Hotep for that great intro. I want to thank Dan and Javier. After I talk, we're gonna have some more music. Clock Serum is gonna close out the show, and I think Father Hotep, you're gonna come back up. Great. So I moved here to Northampton in 2015 with my wife, Amy Francis, to open up a restaurant, Belly of the Beast. We decided that we wanted to move to Northampton because it was similar to the upstate New York place where we grew up, Syracuse, which is a post-industrial city that has never been able to recover from losing the industry at the early part of the 20th century. It is financially very destitute, unfortunately, and no matter what it tries to come back and efforts that it makes to try to come back, it is still a very difficult place to live and own a business, run a business. I've seen so many great businesses open and close there. We were very much wanting to stay in a community that was very much arts-oriented, had a strong queer community, had a strong commitment to actually developing and building communities like Syracuse does, even though it has financial hardships. We found that in Northampton. We definitely feel that when we moved in, there were a lot of wonderful communities already here that we wanted to tap into. We wanted to be involved with a lot of the communities that were here and build those communities together, meld them into a larger melting pot that would then grow and become stronger and become more dedicated to pushing social activism and pushing everything positive to the forefront. We really wanted to start the hard work to build a better, stronger, safer, more inclusive community that I envision Northampton to be. Whenever we say or hear that word Northampton, I believe it's vital to recognize that the land that we call our city is land that has been seized, expropriated, and stolen from indigenous peoples through force and violence. For thousands of years, it has been Pecumtuck land, and it continues to be the homelands of the Pecumtuck, Marwatok, Warnoco, Agawam, Nipmuc, and Abenaki. These native peoples and their descendants are still living here. This appropriation of land is an ongoing issue that we cannot turn a blind eye to. I cannot use the name of our town without acknowledging the genocide that European colonizer settlers have caused for centuries since arriving on these shores. Every day I see our residents and visitors pass by people in the city who they continue to ignore. They continue to walk with their own interests at heart, with no thought as to what the people around them are thinking. I really feel like that's no way to build a community. But what is community? On one level, it's as simple as finding like-minded individuals that you want to spend time with. Those communities can be small, but they can also be powerful because they have shared interests as you. We all have communities of one sort or another like this. But what happens when these small communities then find other groups that share common interests? Those small groups grow and form larger groups, adding another shared aspect of commonality. These larger groups can then connect with others and continue to grow in numbers and interests. This is what community building is to me. Being curious about what your neighbor is doing or thinking, being open to new experiences and new ideas, taking on your neighbor's cares as your own, and in doing so, looking out for your neighbor. But what happens when a community decides that it doesn't want to become curious about what another community is doing? When it decides that it is okay ignoring that other group? This is when we begin to have factions who build metaphorical walls, and communications begin to break down. This is when we begin to ignore the wants and needs of our neighboring community groups instead of focus on what we want to have happen. This is how distrust breeds. This is how we end up as a society like we are living in today, with everyone taking over, talking over each other, and not listening to each other. When everyone assuming rivalry instead of investing and making the repairs that are necessary to bring these factions together to form a community. We can see this in the larger picture worldwide. We can see this if we just look nationally, but we also see this locally in Northampton. We know from being embedded through the last few years that we have seen this again and again happen around our restaurant, around our community, walking up and down the streets of Northampton. We feel that it's something that needs to change. My approach to municipal government is going to be the same as I have had at the restaurant, a focus on building community and building lasting relationships that empowers all of the people in our city. There's a glaring apparency when you look at me. I am a white cis man who holds ancestral privilege. Let me be clear on this. I hold no illusions that historically those factors are problematic and hold negative associations, especially around politicians and people who are working to achieve power. I am not a politician or somebody who wants to achieve power. That is not why I'm running for city council. I have no aspirations to climb the ranks of government. I have no desire to wield power over anyone. In fact, it is my goal in becoming your next city council to use my privilege to fight for the communities who have been historically neglected and move power into their hands, to empower and fight for the voices of the communities who are not able to gain the ear of the mayor or even a city councilor, and to truly listen to their wants and needs. How will an ordinance affect them? How will a change in the budget alter their lives? Will it be better for the better or for worse? And to bring their voices into council chambers, to uplift their beliefs and to make their points of view understood, to start mending the factions back into community. If the pandemic has allowed us anything, it has allowed us to become more interactive in city politics. I, along with many workers and parents citywide, was never able to make time to go to municipal meetings because it meant physically being there. With the transition of city government to Zoom meetings, many of us who were previously unable to attend in chambers now have been able to participate in our city government. While there are still accessibility issues around an online platform, it opened up my eyes, and many others around me, as to how this city truly operates. For me, over the last 16 months, it became apparent that the inaccessibility was seemingly a previous virtue for our city government. Of the 20 plus city council meetings that have happened since the move to Zoom, I have been able to attend over 2/3 of them, frequently making public comment and witnessing how hundreds of voices were able to come together to push for more inclusivity in the decision-making process from our elected officials. I would have thought that the government would have welcomed this influx of people. The number and diversity was elating to me as I watched on screen people that I knew, people that I recognized, and many people whom I have never met before. This is what democracy looks like, I thought. This is how municipal governing is supposed to happen. It quickly became clear to me that while my point of view was shared with the hundreds of people showing up to these meetings to provide personal stories, pleas, and entreaties about everything from zoning laws to reinvesting in our communities, our city leaders were nonplussed. I had hoped that this expression of support around the democratic process would empower our governing bodies to mold their previous decision-making processes towards ones of more transparency. So much happens in government without our input, without our feedback, and without our knowledge. In the early days of these Zoom meetings, I had hoped that this would change, But even now, with hundreds upon hundreds of our citizens actively participating in city council meetings, decisions are still being made behind closed doors. I'll state an example. The construction at the Roundhouse parking lot right over here. When this project was announced, there was immediate outcry by some because the plans called for the unequivocal removal of the encampment beneath South Street with no provisions for the people who lived there. This was quickly brought up to the city, and yet the entreaty was ignored. There was a mad scramble to raise funds and find relocation spots, and yet it was not accomplished quickly enough before people's cars were towed and living spaces destroyed. This is not how we support our communities. In fact, this is how we drive a wedge between factions and build those walls higher. Another example is the Department of Community Care. Throughout the past year, we have spent endless hours trying to introduce the idea of creating a Department of Community Care and moving responsibilities from the police department into this department in order to better help and better serve our community. To many who are in dire circumstances, the appearance of someone in full military gear with multiple weapons, some of them lethal, does not quell the emergency situation and can frequently intensify it. By simply removing the presence of lethal force from an emergency situation, the safety of the individual can be addressed more fully. This model of public care and community support has been around for decades and is successful if it is funded and supported with purpose. Unfortunately, with the mayor's last round of the budgets for 2022, this was not the case. The mayor budgeted less than half of what it would take to suffice to start this program and to make it become what it needs to become to support the community. After hours of public entreaties, some people shared personal devastating stories. The council voted 8-1 to approve the budget as it stood, rather than engaging in a meaningful conversation about how to better serve the constituents who got them elected in the first place. This is not how we build communities. I'm going to skip ahead a little bit because I've said some of these things. The reason why I'm running for city council is because I do not see this type of leadership significantly enough represented in our government. There are some people who will look at the candidates and only see what is on the surface, who will only see my white skin and cisgendered body and make their decision based on the inherent bias that brings to mind. I ask you to look beyond identity politics and see my track record as someone who has been actively involved in community support, as a business owner and outspoken during city council meetings for what I believe to be the most compassionate path forward for the city. I ask you to understand that from the moment I chose to settle here in Northampton, I have engaged with all of the wonderful communities that surround us and actively tried to dismantle the walls surrounding the insular factions in our midst. I ask you to hear when I speak about wanting to build a better foundation and how it's with one eye, and how it is with an eye to help every single one of us, no matter of our economic, social, racial, or physical stature. As my campaign kicks into its next stage, I look forward to getting to know you all better and to share my vision for a more unified and safer city for everyone. I believe in the values of sustainability, diversity, and inclusion, in true community care, and in staying responsive to voices from all walks of life, including those among the most marginalized of us. I believe it is only with the support of our entire community that we can enhance all of our lives together. Together, we can support each other. Together, we can make the path less difficult. And together, we can build a better future, one that is representative of the whole of our community and not just those at the top. Thank you so much for coming this afternoon. Thank you so much for listening. And I'm going to turn it back over to have some sounds. I'll be around if you want to talk to me one-on-one. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. Thank you so much.